In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Welcome, friends, to Crime and Punishment, a legal podcast, not a political one. We absolutely do not discuss politics on this channel. Please do not ban us from YouTube, Big Brother. We love Big Brother on this program more than anyone else. We are huge fans of Big Brother. And in that spirit, I want to wish you all a happy Independence Day. It's July 4th today. The biggest day, America's birthday, land of the free, home of the brave. I have some mixed feelings on July 4th. Also, we have a new system here, so if there's anything you cannot hear, like we couldn't hear the intro, let me know. And there's also some videos we're going to be playing, just two short videos later on. So if you can't hear those, please do let me know in the chat. So I was calculating this morning, out of the past 5 Independence Days, I've spent 2 of them incarcerated, held without bond on false charges. 2 out of 5. I guess that's not bad, but being held without bond on false charges, waiting to be extradited to a foreign state. How often does that happen to any one person? And for that to happen on July 4th? Like, what are the odds of that? It's just beyond astronomical. So, there's that. You get really cynical about July 4th, sitting in jail on false charges on July 4th, let me tell you. There's a Twitter post that I'm not going to butcher. I want to just read it. I want to read it word for word. So if you go to Emperor Invictus on Twitter, that's where I post all of the things that we talk about. Let's see here. I probably should have done that myself. Actually, while we're doing that, let me post the links, which I did pull up. I pulled up the links today for Virus Style and for the website, so that you can sign up for the email list, and you can, goodness gracious, you can sign up, you can get the, wow, I'm not signed into the chat. You can get the merchandise, but that's going to be tough to do when I can't get into YouTube to begin with. So this is the sort of thing we're going to be fixing over the next couple weeks here, because like I said, we got a new system. Been fixing the audio for like the past hour. Now I got 2-step verification. I don't even know where I'm supposed to get that number. Let's see. Alright. So, now that we're in, not now, let's do that later. For goodness sake, not now. Alright, here we go. We're going to post this thing in the chat. Now that I'm in here, close. Thank you very much for that warning. There's the viral style in the chat. If you're listening on X, that's what we're going through here, is getting into YouTube. I'm still not banned on YouTube. Don't know how. I guess because we only talk about legal commentary, because we don't talk about politics on this show. That's probably why. And here is the website in the chat. You scroll down all the way to the bottom, and you can sign up for the newsletter. So, all that out of the way. Let's go back to Twitter, or X rather, and let's find that post I was talking about. I retweeted this morning. It's a post that has a picture of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Pictures side by side, and it says, "Did you know that America's second president, John Adams, and third president, Thomas Jefferson, died within hours of each other on the same day, July 4th, 1826, on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence?" Actually, yes, I did know that. I happened to have known that before I read this tweet, but just seeing that today, that was the first thing I saw, really, on the internet today. Makes you think they're also rolling over in their graves together today. Especially Jefferson. But like I said, my thoughts on July 4th kind of go both ways, right? So take Jefferson specifically, for instance. Just think about Charlottesville. That's where Jefferson was from. It's where Monticello is. Charlottesville is Jefferson's town. Jefferson, Madison, and who was it? Was it Monroe? They all practiced law in that courthouse in Charlottesville, the very one where we are all being put on trial. Every time you go into the main courtroom on the first floor, they're looking right down at you. They're looking over the judge. Thomas Jefferson's back there, right behind the judge, looking down on everything going on. And on the one hand, you got to think, man, how outraged would he be right now? That the University of Virginia, which honors Jefferson, has control over the prosecutors, right, who are prosecuting people for engaging in free speech. And Jefferson is watching this entire trial go on, and you got to think, how outraged would he be? You think of John Adams, died on the same day, July 4th. He was not a Virginian. He's a Massachusetts guy. But he was a Federalist, and he was big on the powers of the executive, right? He passed some, well, they weren't really controversial, but they're controversial now because we've taken this hard left turn since FDR. So he was the one who signed the Alien and Sedition Acts. He was the one who appointed all these midnight judges as he was leaving office, which arguably shaped the future of America. He was big on executive power, probably not as big as Alexander Hamilton, but still, he was a Federalist, right? And you got to think, how would he see all of these prosecutions against Trump right now? Civil actions against him in New York, criminal in New York and Georgia, and the federal courts, and you got to think, these two dying on July 4th, if they saw what was going on right now, July 4th, 2024, would they ever have rebelled against King George? Don't know. But I'll tell you this, all the Trumpsters are outraged about this is unprecedented. No one would ever go after their political opponents. A sitting president would never try to take out his opposition through corrupt trials and so on and so forth. Like, all the things we see happening in the trunk, that would never have happened. It has never happened in American history. It should never happen. It's totally unprecedented. Well, it's actually not. Now, as far as the limited circumstance of a man is running for office against an incumbent, and the incumbent is having his political opponent jailed, yes, I suppose this is the first time that that's happened. But as far as a sitting president using his power to destroy a political opponent who had run against him, no, this is not the first time. And Jefferson was the one to do that, as a matter of fact. One of the most fascinating characters in American history would be Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr ran for president against Jefferson, and back then, the way you chose a vice president was they just got the second highest number of votes. You had two bulls running against each other. One wins, one loses. The loser takes vice president, right? Only in the case of Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, there was no winner. They tied. It was an amazing deadlock. And everybody expected Burr to just step down and be vice president. He just wasn't having that. He wanted to be president. So he lost a lot of political clout. So think of the analogy between Nixon and Trump. There are a lot of analogies, but let's just talk about one. Nixon loses the election to Kennedy. And if you've ever seen the Oliver Stone movie of Nixon, they tell him, Dick, they stole it fair and square, the Democrats. You just got to eat this one. Run again in 4 years, and you're going to win. 8 years when he's out, whatever, you're going to win the next time. And Nixon's like, that's a lifetime in politics. But he does the classy thing. He steps aside. He doesn't make a stink over how the Democrats stole the election, even though they did. And ultimately, as you know, Nixon becomes president. Contrast that with Trump. Trump could have just left office, come back for the 2024 election, and all this stuff about J6 and overturning the election and fake electors and all that he tried to do to say the Democrats stole this election, all of that never would have happened. He'd have just run for president, he'd have won, and there'd be no controversy right now. But here we are, right? So Aaron Burr loses to Thomas Jefferson, does not do the Nixon approach. He takes the Trump approach and says, no, I'm going to win this, and I'm going to be president. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to convince all the Federalists, because he was running as a Republican against Republican Thomas Jefferson, all right? And he says, I'm going to get all the Federalists to support me, because essentially he is the Federalist position of the Republicans. And Alexander Hamilton tells all the Federalists, no, do not vote for this guy. Ultimately, Jefferson does win, right? And Aaron Burr does become vice president. And then in the next election, 1804, he's gone. Jefferson won't have anything to do with him. And he goes, and I think he runs for governor or something in New York, which is where he was from. I don't remember. But ultimately, Hamilton again goes after him. And there's a great telling of this whole story in How to Take Over the World, my favorite podcast. They just did a 2-part episode on Alexander Hamilton. And they take the anti-Burr approach. God love him. But it's a great podcast, great episode. But they go into this in more detail than I'm going into right now. But ultimately, there's the duel between Hamilton and Burr. You already know about that. We've talked about it before. And then Hamilton's dead. Burr is politically ruined. So he goes out west. And what he does out west is something of legend. He is going to raise an army, invade Mexico. He has these Knights of the Golden Circle that are going to basically conquer Mexico and the Caribbean, right? And establish this empire. Just an epic story that is foiled because of Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson, like Biden, puts Burr on trial for treason. Of course, his hands are clean. It's not him doing it. No, goodness no. Just like it's not Biden who's controlling all these Democratic prosecutors and Merrick Garland and Jack Smith and Alan Bragg. No, goodness no. Fannie Willis. Biden has nothing to do with him. This isn't him. Thomas Jefferson would never prosecute his political enemy. And again, little different because Burr was not running for president at the time, but Burr was allegedly trying to raise an army to invade Mexico. That's pretty epic. And so they charged him with treason. It's Thomas Jefferson, freest country in the world, most famously leftist president in history, Biden included. Like, Thomas Jefferson is held up as the man. And Ezra Pound points out that that's because Jefferson effectively ruled the country, not just during his 8 years as president, but all the succeeding presidents until he died. You know, the next president was his protege, and then the one after that was his protege, and then, you know, so on and so forth. For 50 years, essentially, Jefferson ruled America. And he recast, like, this whole mythos we have about the Founding Fathers, and the reason we don't like Hamilton, and George Washington is essentially a god king. This is all Jefferson's creation. And so it's heresy to say that Jefferson was a rabid leftist who supported the French Revolution and wanted heads chopped off. You don't talk about that. You don't talk about him supporting militant atheism and, you know, all the horrible things that, or his physical cowardice, or all these terrible things about Jefferson. We don't talk about those things because that mythos makes him, one of the god. There's a biography of Aaron Burr where they talk about this kind of in different, like more Christian tones, and they say that Aaron Burr was essentially the Satan of this mythos. So George Washington, of course, is God. Aaron Burr kills his favorite, his son, which would be Hamilton. Obviously not his biological son, but you know what I mean. And Jefferson, Washington's archangel, which, again, is part of the mythos. He wasn't really Washington's archangel. Washington really didn't even support Jefferson, but that's how the mythos goes, right? But Jefferson put down Burr. So what Biden has done is not unprecedented. It's just you can't say these things about Thomas Jefferson. That's heresy. So how would these guys feel about what's going on? Jefferson and Adams both died on July 4th. I don't know. I don't know. You got to think they were, maybe not Adams so much, but Jefferson was a rabid leftist. He might have supported the Tiki Torch prosecutions in Charlottesville. He might have. He might have supported Biden going after Trump and having him charged with what is essentially treason. Obviously, that's not what he's really charged with, but that's presumably why the case against Aaron Burr failed. Besides the, dramatic lack of evidence, he was also charged with treason, which is not really well defined. Certainly not back in 1807 when all this happened. Not very well defined in the Constitution, so it was just doomed to failure. But it was enough to ruin Burr, right? And one of the most fascinating things about this, I think, just as a personal fascination, just being in this vortex of politics, right, in the stream of history. I don't know if it's still there because it's been years since any of us has been allowed in any buildings in Washington D.C. But if you go to the Library of Congress, again, if you used to go to the Library of Congress, they had Jefferson's entire library on display. Encased in glass, of course, so you can't take it down and read the volumes. But one of the things that struck me most, the only book I even remember on his bookshelf was called The Treason Trial of Aaron Burr. That is so telling. That of all the volumes in this man's library, he was following that trial so closely. He was so personally invested in Burr's treason trial that you can see it on display in the Library of Congress. Fascinating stuff. I would recommend everybody read Ezra Pound's writings on these guys. He kind of takes the mythological view too. He obviously loves the Founding Fathers, loves the founding of America. He wrote the book I'm sure we talked about on this program, definitely Guerrilla Radio, but Jefferson and or Mussolini by Ezra Pound. And he pointed out that, they used all this language and they said they had these different policies, but really if you look at Jefferson and Mussolini, they kind of had the same policies and the same MO and the same political pragmatism. They were both kind of the same person. It's just that Mussolini's working in this 2,000-year-old society that's got a crusted aristocracy, and families have been living in these homes for the past 2,000 years. And Jefferson, on the other hand, is working in a total wilderness with essentially just infinite expansive possibilities. Good book, great book. Everything Ezra Pound wrote was great, but I'd recommend that book to you as well. So, let's see the chat. If there's any problems with the audio, again, please let me know. Storm Hunter says Monticello is beautiful. Yeah, it's interesting. I've only seen it once, and believe it or not, the one time I went there was August 11th of 2017. The day of the Torchlit rally for which we are all now being prosecuted. Just what an historical irony. And when I got there, took the tour with a friend of mine, and at the end of the tour, this tour guide starts going off about white supremacy and says, white supremacy is still alive and kicking today. In fact, there was just an altercation where white supremacists did X, Y, and Z in a parking lot at Walmart. And of course, this guy had no idea, but I was there. I was there at that parking lot at Walmart. I was there. Chris Cantwell was having a gathering, and the Antifa found out about it, showed up, started trying to start things with Cantwell. And he had the whole thing on body cam, thank God. So the whole thing was a total lie. A total lie. A demonstrable lie on camera. But didn't stop it from spreading around Charlottesville like wildfire, this Antifa lie. So that even the tour guide at Monticello was blasting this lie to the group. It's incredible how Charlottesville works. This little hellhole of a town. So yes, I agree, Storm Hunter. Monticello is beautiful, but what a history. He also says, I knew the snowflake that took Albemarle County to court to try to take the Lewis and Clark statue down in the roundabout. She said Sacagawea was portrayed too weak. I don't know that story, but that sounds about right. Leo Zakari says, how Adams would see what's going on with Trump depends on if Adams was a political opponent of Trump or not. If Trump was an opponent, Adams would have no problem with it. I agree. Very insightful comment. There is a book called The Political Depravity of the Founding Fathers. We have read that on this program. I know we have. Again, we have this mythos that we are raised with in elementary school, where the Founding Fathers are just the most esteemed noblemen in world history, in all the history of humanity. No one has been as enlightened and genteel and all the rest as our Founding Fathers. But if you actually look at the Founding Fathers and their conduct, they were just awful. They were terrible. I mean, I'm not blasting Adams for attacking his political opponents, but as far as what we consider civil conduct, you've heard me criticize people left and right on this program before, but you'll never hear me, calling them profane names and talking about their children and the mudslinging in the era of the Founding Fathers was disgusting. These people all hate Trump because he's such a colorful character. Trump had nothing on the Founding Fathers. They were just depraved. So I agree. If Trump was Adams' political opponent, Adams would just tear him a new one. Put him on trial, all the rest. Yeah, I mean, Adams was a product of his time, just like Jefferson, Washington, Hamilton. I mean, they were all men of their time. Stormrunner says, I will tell you how I feel about it. And I always knew I was going to find myself here eventually because I suppose I'm guilty of my own hopium. Completely politically marooned. Even Kennedy Jr. looks like a kook. Well, I mean, there's a lot you can say about everybody running for office now, I'll tell you that. Doom Paul says, greetings, Augustus. Always a pleasure to listen to historical revisionism. Yeah. Greetings, Doom Paul. Yeah, I guess it's, unfortunately, you could call it historical revisionism. I'd call it historical correction of the record, I mean, think about, if your kids are listening right now, please, mute this program or have them leave the room or just turn off the program and come back to it later. This is a family-friendly program, by the way, but think about, I won't say the other one, let's say the Easter Bunny. Right? Let's say the Easter Bunny. You're raised in school to believe in the Easter Bunny, just as a limited example. Not that they are blasting propaganda in your head about the Easter Bunny, but you grow up believing in this, right? Everybody in class believes the Easter Bunny is going to come and they're going to hide eggs and you're going to go find them. And then when you grow up, you realize, oh, well, that's not real and this is an ancient tradition and our parents hid the eggs. You don't look back on that and say you're teaching kids historical revisionism because you're telling them actually it was your parents and here's where this tradition comes from. It's not historical revisionism, it's just you grew up, right? So the same thing about the Founding Fathers. Like, we have classical liberalism and the division of the separation of powers, and the presidents can do this and Congress can do that. And our Founding Fathers were great men, and they were noble, and they loved each other very much, and they just didn't like King George because of taxes, but they had no self-interest whatsoever. They were all about the public good. You're taught that in elementary school. When you grow up, is it historical revisionism to say, yeah, that's not even close to true? Of course they were self-interested. They were wealthy merchants who were, upset about the taxes, and they overthrew the government for it. It's not really historical vision. You just grew up. But to be fair, I mean, Doompaul's right. That's what's called historical revisionism now, right? Valiant Thor says, have a blessed day. Back at you. Jimmy, happy Independence Day. Back at you. He says, thank you, Big Brother, and the current political party for keeping us safe. I agree. If you're listening to this program and it's a year down the road or 8 years down the road or whenever it is, and there's a different political party or person in power, we support you. I want you to know we support you, whoever and whenever you are. We love Big Brother. Especially the one in power right now. Valiant Thor says, at this juncture, my skepticism extends to both Republicans and the majority of Democrats. It appears akin to a WWE wrestling spectacle. Yes. Well, especially with Trump's advent, having been in the WWE, famously. Well, we are fast heading toward idiocracy with the wrestler for president. All right, so let's go back to Twitter here, Emperor Invictus, where we have our articles. There was another tweet that I wanted to read before we move on to an article. Actually, we're going to read the Supreme Court opinion, not an article. We're going to go straight to the source material. And the other thing, the debate. The debate happened. We've got to talk about that. I'm not going to play clips from it or anything, but we got to at least talk about it. But first, I want to read this. This is a quotation of a guy named Michael Smith. I honestly don't know who that is. I don't know if it's in a book or what. But this girl reposted this with a tweet, and it says, have you ever wondered what happened to the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence? 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or hardships of the Revolutionary War. They signed and pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. What kind of men were they? 24 were lawyers and jurists. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers and large plantation owners, men of means, well educated. But they signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well that the penalty would be death if they were captured. Carton Braxton of Virginia, a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ship swept from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts and died in rags. Thomas McKean was so hounded by the British that he was forced to move his family almost constantly. He served in the Congress without pay, and his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and poverty was his reward. Vandals or soldiers or both looted the properties of Ellery, Clymer, Hull, Walton, Gwinnett, Hayward, Rutledge, and Middleton. At the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British General Cornwallis had taken over the Nelson home for his headquarters. The owner quietly urged General George Washington to open fire. The home was destroyed, and Nelson died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The enemy jailed his wife, and she died within a few months. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and his grist mill were laid to waste. For more than a year, he lived in forests and caves, returning home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. A few weeks later, he died from exhaustion and a broken heart. Norris and Livingston suffered similar fates. Such were the stories and sacrifices of the American Revolution. These were not wild-eyed, rabble-rousing ruffians. They were soft-spoken men of means and education. They had security, but they valued liberty more. Standing tall, straight, and unwavering, they pledged, for the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. It's a great write-up. You never think of what happened to these guys. You just assume they signed the thing. The British, what are they going to do? They just fought some battles in the field, and then, of course, we won, and now we've got fireworks and barbecues. But these men suffered great personal costs. Their families did. Their wives died, were jailed, their children scattered, living in hiding. Is bad. A couple reasons to bring this up. One, you getting kicked off of Facebook means absolutely nothing. I'm so sick to death of people crying about how they got kicked off of Facebook, or their mom's mad at them for something they saw on social media. Or, I do have sympathy for people who, they're working at, Pizza Hut or a finance company or a car dealership, wherever they're working, and Antifa get them fired. Like, yes, that's bad. But that's just not even the tip of the iceberg. You're barely scratching the surface for what these men had to go through to declare independence from Britain. They were horrid things they went through. Now, on the other hand, the second reason to bring it up, going back to my point at the beginning that I have kind of, I wouldn't say ambivalent, but complicated views on the 4th of July. Same for American independence at all, right? These men were traitors. They were just outright, by definition, traitors to the British Crown. This is what happens to traitors. That being said, we're hundreds of years removed now from this, so it's not like you got to get emotional about it. Just a matter of fact, these men were traitors to the Crown. The British Crown went after them, crushed them as much as they could. Obviously, they lost the war, but that's what happens when you betray the Crown. So if you're going to revolt against the government, you have to expect things like that. But you can look at these things, as I said, dispassionately. Personally, just ideologically, morally, religiously, I 100% believe the American Revolution was one of the worst ideas in history. We should be British. We should never have revolted against the Crown. History obviously would have turned out much differently. The American Revolution was just a Freemasonic, atheistic, materialistic, just selfish booby trap for all generations that followed. It was just awful. What a horrible decision. However, the balls of these guys and what it means to be American, I mean, you have to love it as an American. Like, these guys challenged the greatest power in the world and won and forged a new country out of the wilderness. And next thing you know, you got Michael Jordan playing for the Bulls. You got Donald Trump, Home Alone, NASCAR, fighter jets. I mean, this is where America was born. You got to be proud of that. So you can see both sides of that. You can see both sides of the Civil War. Obviously, I'm a Southerner. Again, morally, I think the South was right. Legally, that's an open question. Which side actually had the legal right? The South will say, and all their legal scholars and all their congressmen and everybody who defends the South will say, Lincoln had no right to blockade the South. Lincoln had no right to invade the South. He had no right to do this, that, or the other. The federal soldiers should have gotten off the land. We had the legal right to secede. You can say that till you're blue in the face, but the North won the war. And the North's position, legally speaking, was you guys sign on to this union. You don't just get to walk away. You don't just get to secede and back out. This is a union of states. You voted for it. Your states ratified it. You don't get to get out now. You can see both sides of that, but at the end of the day, the North won. And that's what law is, really. Law is a command from the sovereign, to put it in John Austin's words, which is positivist, but we're not getting into that right now. The fact is, North won, right? So you can be mad all you want about it, but that's what law really is. It is a declaration of the state of things, a proscription that is enforced by the threat of violence or sometimes violence itself. So when you have the J6 thing, for instance, one thing that just gets under my skin, just grinds my gears, is how they're going after all the lawyers for saying we should be filing these election lawsuits, saying there was a fraudulent election, or in the case of John Eastman specifically, writing a memorandum of law saying that, this is the function of the vice president, and the vice president has the power to do X, Y, and Z, and that is what the president should do. Going after lawyers for that, to me, is insane. It's just batty. It's like if liberals had taken over, which they did after the G.W. Bush administration. Let's say Obama came into power and then said, you know what, we're going to prosecute John Yoo. Because John Yoo wrote the torture memorandum. And Obama ran on a platform of, I'm going to shut down Guantanamo Bay. This is an embarrassment to America. This torture program we've got is an embarrassment. What if Obama had come in and prosecuted John Yoo? I think the entire establishment would have been outraged. They'd say, he's a lawyer, for goodness sake. He's just writing a memorandum of law, advising the president on what is legal and not legal. Same thing for John Eastman, but John Eastman is being prosecuted and disbarred, kicked off all of his cases. He's being ruined for this. Which again just means we're right back to where we started with the American Republic. But again, that's what law is. Law is just a command with the threat of force behind it. And it's legitimized force because it's the law. It's like a circular argument. What it really comes down to is who has the force. Which is why I went to law school instead of getting my PhD in philosophy. Because sooner or later, all arguments come to nothing. They all run out. And then you're left with who actually has power. So, the debate. Trump and Biden have a debate. Everybody knows what's wrong with Biden. The media can't admit it. They're saying he's sharp as a tack. Democrats won't admit it. They're saying it's a right-wing conspiracy theory. And by the way, Trump's the one who has dementia and he's out of his mind. And the debate settled that question once and for all. Everybody knows now. This right-wing conspiracy theory is one of those conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. He's out of his mind. You've all seen it on camera. But my favorite part, I don't know about yours, was the whole thing about Charlottesville, which came up because Biden ran on the whole, I'm running for office because of Charlottesville. Because these Nazis are trying to take freedoms away and that whole business, right? So they try to call Trump out on the very fine people quote. Which was not at all the quote. Oh, that's what I was getting at. I was going to play that clip. Completely forgot to download it. Let's see if we can find that. Let's see if you guys can hear this. I hope you can. There we go. All right, I'm going to play this. Let me know if you can hear it.
Very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No,
I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this, there are two sides to a story. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment. But there are two sides to the country. Does anybody have a final? Does anybody have, you have an infrastructure.
So that was what was actually said. Very fine people on both sides. Of course, they blasted him for supporting neo-Nazis. If you listen to the whole, that was 2 minutes and 24 seconds. If you take the time to listen to 2 minutes and 24 seconds, you can see, obviously, that was not what he said. He was not. He specifically denounced neo-Nazis and white nationalists repeatedly in that 2 minutes and 24 seconds. Biden tried to do that in the debates, and the internet just tore him up after that. What's really interesting is Trump specifically condoned and complimented the torchlit rally the night before Unite the Right. Is that interesting? No one ever gets him on that. They always get him for the very fine people thing. But now that we're all being prosecuted for that rally that he just complimented, I wonder if they're going to go after him before November on that. And I wonder what his comments will be on that. So, let's get to the best thing. Absolute immunity for the president. So, Spencer, actually, Richard Spencer, put out a commentary in the past couple days. It was actually spot on. Spot on. He's invoking Schmidt, saying, you know, who decides the exception? One of his most favorite lines, sovereign means he who decides the exception. Like, is it the president who decides? Or is it the Supreme Court who decides? We don't know, right? And it looks like the Supreme Court, because they're the ones saying what the law is, but going to the opinion itself, there's a lot of, like this, like the thing with the Charlottesville, very fine people on both sides, a lot of media dicing and a lot of people with their own commentary. And so in this case, we're just going to go straight to the opinion. If you saw back when it happened, when the opinion came out, CNN was real quick to publish an article saying Justice Sotomayor says that Trump is now a king in all but name. Hence the title of this episode. The majority opinion specifically slams Sotomayor and Jackson. And it's, I won't say unprecedented, but it is out of the ordinary for the dissent and the majority to go at each other's throats like this opinion. And I won't say it's like personal attacks, but I mean, it's pretty heated in this opinion. But the majority points out that this is a very limited opinion and that the dissenting liberal justices are just out of line because they're saying things that are just not true. Imagine that, liberals saying things that are not true. But take Roe v. Wade as an example, right? The left loses their mind because Dobbs comes out. You know, Roe v. Wade is destroyed. Women are in jeopardy. The right is waging war on women. Women are going to die now because they're being raped all over and they can't get an abortion because so on and so forth. I mean, you saw the news when it happened. And when you actually read the opinion of Justice Alito, you actually read what it said, it didn't say anything like that. It said, we did not have the right as the Supreme Court to make a blanket law that abortion should be legal. We don't have that right. This is a matter for the states to decide. It's the state prerogative on public health. The states have to pass laws on this. We, the Supreme Court, can't say it's legal or illegal or anything of the sort. It's not a federal question. It's not a constitutional question. This belongs to the states. So we're overturning Roe v. Wade and we're sending it back to the states. That's all. That's all. You guys decide. This is a democracy. This is how the American Republic works, this democratic republic that we have. Sending it back to the states. You guys figure out if abortion's legal or illegal. Kind of the same thing here. So in that case, they're saying, look, very limited opinion. We're not making these blanket assumptions about anything. We're just saying this is not our job to decide. This is the state's job to decide. And of course, the left just goes ballistic and makes up all this nonsense that was not part of the opinion. Likewise, here, if you actually read the opinion, the majority specifically slams the dissent, saying they're acting like the sky is falling and we're going to have a dictatorship in a year, and the country's out of control now, and they're making up all these things that have nothing to do with our opinion. Our opinion is simply the president has absolute immunity for official acts. And we are sending it back to the court, again, just like Roe v. Wade, we're sending it back to the states, right, so they can decide. In this case, we are sending it back to the trial court, so the trial court judge can decide which of these acts were official acts and which were unofficial acts. All we're saying is that if they were official acts, he's immune. If they were not official acts, then he's not immune. That's all the majority is saying. It's a pretty common sense opinion, just like Dobbs. It's super common sense. We're just so not used to common sense because it's been essentially illegal for the past 50 years to use common sense. 70, really. So that's really all the majority opinion says. So if it goes back to the district court and the trial court says, actually none of these acts were official acts. They're all unofficial acts, and you're going to go on trial for these. Well, then you're in a different pickle. And Trump's right back to square one. And he's going to have to appeal to the Supreme Court and say, no, the trial court got this wrong. These were all official acts. None of these were private, unofficial acts. And so I should have absolute immunity. And then you'll cross that bridge when you get there. The Supreme Court isn't saying everything that happened concerning the election in J6, Trump has blanket immunity for everything. That's not what they're saying at all. They're just saying we're sending it back to the trial court. You figure out which acts were official and which were unofficial. And if they were official, he has absolute immunity. That's all they're saying. The interesting thing to note from all the political pundits, the politicians, everybody, on the left that is that no one's talking about absolute immunity of judges or prosecutors or qualified immunity for cops, all of which has the same exact analysis. Were they official duties or were they not part of their official duties? If they're acting within the scope of their official duties, a judge cannot be sued, right? They have absolute immunity from lawsuits. That's a long-standing thing we've got here in this country. I don't like it. You might not like it. I get it. I mean, sometimes you got to make a tough call. And, this is one of them. I get the reasoning for absolute immunity for judges. I don't necessarily agree in all cases. I think maybe it should be qualified immunity. Prosecutors, 100% I disagree. 100%. Because they will do things that are clearly out of control, and you can't sue them. They have absolute immunity, just like Trump now. These official acts as president. And I say now, but really, what anyone will point out to you who's not a Marxist, who has any understanding of the law whatsoever, or our legal history, they'll tell you he already had this immunity. Every president has. That's just the way the president's office was set up. And that reminds me. Here's another link I'm going to share with you guys in the chat in YouTube. It's an article, a law review article that I wrote back in law school. Believe it or not, no one would publish it. They never published my eugenics article either. I'm probably glad about that one, because God forbid we had a eugenics program today. We'd all be wiped out. But this article that I wrote in law school was The Authoritarian Foundations of the Presidential Office. And it points out the Founding Fathers actually intended the office of the presidency to be something of an elective monarchy. There's no ancient divine right of kings. There's no hereditary office, so your son doesn't become president after you. And you got to remember, back then, you could run for president for life. The only reason we had a 2-term presidency was because Washington established this as a precedent. So everybody had this gentleman's agreement that after 2 terms, I'm going to walk away, until FDR. Right? FDR stayed in for, I recall it being 4 terms, died in office, essentially a king. And after that, then people were like, okay, so that's what happens when we don't have a law in place about this. And now it's limited to 2 terms. You can only serve 2 terms as president, right? A maximum of 8 years. But again, at the time that the Constitution was founded, at the time that the Federalist Papers were written, the origins of the presidential office, it was intended to be something of a monarchy that was limited by this separation of powers, by the checks and balances of the Supreme Court and the legislature. A king can put the country at war and then exhaust the treasury fighting that war. Happened all the time in English history. And so the Americans were like, well, you can set us at enmity with whatever country you want. You can't declare war, though. Only Congress can do that. And Congress is going to control the purse strings. So, Congress goes to war with, I don't know, Italy, let's say. And Congress declares war. And now you're fighting. And now all of a sudden the public doesn't agree. And so they put in new congressmen, and the Congress says, we don't like this war anymore. The American people don't like this war anymore. We're going to cut off funding for the war. Well, now the president can't wage war anymore. But that doesn't change the fact that the entire office of the presidency was supposed to be like the king, just an elected king whose purse strings were controlled by the Congress. So let's not forget that. Let's not forget that as we read this. No, that's a legal document. Please tell me I kept this thing up. All right, here we go. Let's go back to the chat first before we start reading this. I'm not going to read the majority opinion. I think it's just, like I said, that's pretty much it. They're not saying all these crazy things. They're just saying we're sending it back. He's got absolute immunity for official acts. That's that. Now I'll go figure out if they were official or unofficial. What we are going to read is just excerpts from the 2 dissenting opinions, right? All right, what a great surprise, says Magnolia Madam. Another great episode. Why, thank you. So let's go to this opinion here. We're going to first read an excerpt from the opinion, the dissenting opinion of Justice Sotomayor. Again, there are 3 liberal justices. We're going to read from 2 of the liberal dissenting justices, Sotomayor and Jackson. This one is from the former. Sotomayor says, today's decision to grant former presidents immunity for their official acts is deeply wrong. As troubling as this criminal immunity doctrine is in theory, the majority's application of the doctrine to the indictment in this case is perhaps even more troubling. In the hands of the majority, this new official acts immunity operates as a one-way ratchet. First, the majority declares all of the conduct involving the Justice Department and the Vice President to be official conduct, yet it refuses to designate any course of conduct alleged in the indictment as private, despite concessions from Trump's counsel. Trump's counsel conceded, for example, that the allegation that Trump turned to a private attorney who was willing to spread knowingly false claims of election fraud to spearhead his challenges to the election results sounds private. Now, right off the bat, well, not right off the bat, I mean, this is section what? Section 7, so she's been going on for a long time, but now that we're at section 7, that's not, entirely the case, right? Like, the justices will stand there while you're making oral argument. The justices will interrupt you. And this isn't just the United States Supreme Court. This is appellate courts to sometimes trial court. I mean, you could be arguing, the judge can interrupt you, and you just got to be prepared for it. You just got to roll with it, right? But especially in the appellate court and the Supreme Court, if you're making an oral argument, you should expect that the justices are going to keep interrupting you, with all these random questions that come to their mind. And a lot of the times, these judges will put forward hypotheticals. And they'll say, well, the allegations are X, Y, and Z. What do you say in relation to those allegations? Or they'll say, let me give you a hypothetical. What if farmers on Easter did X, Y, and Z? Do you think your theory would apply then? That's just how these things go. I mean, everybody knows that's how these go. So for her to say, well, Trump's counsel was admitting that all of these things were private and that Trump didn't have any, none of these were official acts and his counsel already admitted these things, like, that's not, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. You're kind of just arguing, and you're conceding to things in this, interrogation as part, like, arguendo, right? For the sake of the argument, yes, we would say that sounds private. You're not saying, yes, the circumstances, like, none of what Donald Trump was doing was official acts. Like, that's not how that went down. That's not what he's saying at all. So you have to already be questioning the integrity of this dissenting opinion. To continue, he likewise conceded, that is Trump's attorney, that the allegations that Trump conspired with another private attorney who caused the filing in court of a verification signed by Trump to contain false allegations to support a challenge sounds private. Again, the allegation that Trump did X, Y, and Z sounds private. Sounds private is not him conceding that, yes, this is private conduct and is not an official act. First of all. Second of all, it's the allegation. Now, I get they're arguing the allegations. They're not arguing the facts of the case, but this is just, to call it slanted would be charitable. It's dishonest, is what it is. She's making it sound like, well, the lawyer already said none of this was official acts, and the majority is saying that everything he did was an official act. Neither of those statements are true. That's not what Trump's lawyer conceded, and that's not what the majority is saying. So let's skip through the rest of that paragraph. Second, the majority designates certain conduct immune while refusing to recognize anything as prosecutable. It shields large swaths of conduct involving the Justice Department with immunity. See also Part 5, but does not give an inch in the other direction. The majority admits that the vice president's responsibility presiding over the Senate is not an executive branch function, and it further admits that the president plays no direct constitutional or statutory role in the counting of electoral votes. Okay. Yet, the majority refuses to conclude that Trump lacks immunity for his alleged attempts to enlist the vice president to use his ceremonial role at the January 6th certification proceeding to fraudulently alter the election results. Instead, it worries that a prosecution for this conduct might make it harder for the president to use the vice president to advance his agenda in Congress. Such a prosecution, according to the majority, may well hinder the president's ability to perform his constitutional functions. Right. What was it? That reminds me of something when I was reading the secondhand information. CNN was quoting Sotomayor and Jackson and complaining that this majority opinion will require... Oh, that was Chevron, right? This majority opinion, this is going to require Congress to pass clear and unambiguous laws. And we can't expect Congress to do that. That's just not realistic. These federal agencies, they have to be able to use these ambiguous and vague laws in order to enact their rules. We can't get involved in that. That's actually exactly why the courts are supposed to be involved, and that's exactly why the Congress is supposed to pass these clear laws. But maybe we'll discuss Chevron at a different time. Such a prosecution may hinder the president's ability to perform his constitutional functions. Again, which is the reason for bringing up Chevron. these are the actual roles of these different branches, right? The Congress passes laws, the executive enforces laws or doesn't, and the judiciary determines whether the laws were broken or not, or whether they're constitutional. Like, that's what they do. So the Supreme Court saying it's the president's role to do X and the vice president's role to do Y. And if the courts and everybody, like the DOJ, they're all going to interfere in that, then it's a violation of the separation of powers. It hinders the office of the presidency, and the liberals are outraged about that. But the office of the presidency, as I said in the article and earlier, has always been like that. In fact, Sutherland, one of the four horsemen back in the New Deal era, right, wrote this opinion that surprised the liberals because he was supporting the office of the presidency. So it goes both ways. It's like whoever's in power or whoever's coming into power, like that's how the liberals will respond. But the so-called right-wing justices, they're just looking at history and they're saying this is just plainly the case, right? So in that opinion, Sutherland was talking about the president and how it relates to the British Crown and where these powers of the executive come from. And you could say the same thing here. Like, the vice president is used to advance the president's agenda in Congress. That's how it's always been. And that's why Thomas Jefferson didn't have Aaron Burr around the second time he went into the presidency. Because Aaron Burr was just hostile to Jefferson and everybody else, and he's not going to advance Jefferson's agenda in the Congress. Just like, obviously, Trump is not going to select Mike Pence as his vice president this time around because he's not going to push Trump's agenda in the Congress. Like, this is just, Schoolhouse Bill of Rights 101. This is the Constitution. You should have learned this in the third grade. This is how this works. But Jackson and Sotomayor are outraged about it. Such a prosecution, according to the majority, may hinder the president's ability to perform his constitutional functions. Whether a prosecution for this conduct warrants immunity should have been an easy question, but the majority turns it into a debatable one. Remarkably, the majority goes further and declines to deny immunity even for the allegations that Trump organized fraudulent elector slates, pressured states to subvert the legitimate election results, and has exploited violence at the Capitol to influence the certification proceedings. Now, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Sotomayor that those might not be official acts. Her next paragraph will be very telling. They're good examples of what an official act might be, given this doom and gloom perception of the majority opinion. But again, the whole point is we're sending it back to the trial court. You figure out whether these were official acts or unofficial acts. If they were official, you can't prosecute them. If they were unofficial, then have at it. Have at it. Prosecute him. Jail him. Not up to us. It's up to you. So, organizing fraudulent elector slates, like if that happened, that's really bad. It's hard to say that, Joseph Stalin being in power and organizing fraudulent elections and making fake electors to verify the election, like that he stole, we wouldn't say, well, that's just Joseph Stalin's prerogative. We would say that guy is a tyrant. Communism is evil. We hate that guy. If Trump's in power and he really did lose the election and he's slating all these fake electors, then yeah, have at it. Because that's bad. We would not want that, right? But that's what the majority is saying. Go back and figure it out. Was it official? Was it unofficial? And then you can put them on trial and then determine, did that really even happen? Because as Sotomayor has tellingly said, these are all just allegations. The Supreme Court is not getting into the nitty-gritty of whether this happened. There's been, to my knowledge, no evidence presented yet. This is all about the allegations in the complaint. The allegations made against Trump. You got to go back and find out, did these even happen? Were they official to begin with? If they were official acts, we're not even talking about it. If they were unofficial acts, if this was his private conduct that is not covered by immunity, then go to trial on it and find out whether it happened, whether he really did these things. We're not even close to getting to that bridge yet. The problem is these liberals want us to be at that bridge because they want to put him on trial on trumped up charges so that they can use that in the November election. But we're running out of time. What, 8, 9, 10, 11? We got 4 months. 4 months. And you're never going to put him on trial and convict him before November. Not going to happen. No way. So, let's go to this, probably her best paragraph. Looking beyond the fate of this particular prosecution, the long-term consequences of today's decision are stark. And this is what the media picked up on, and you're about to find out why, because this is a very good argument. You know, if she were right, it would be a very good argument. The court effectively creates a law-free zone around the president, upsetting the status quo that has existed since the founding. This new official act's immunity now lies about like a loaded weapon for any president that wishes to place his own interests, his own political survival, or his own financial gain above the interests of the nation. The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way, under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Again, not actually what the majority's saying, but let's say that is what they're saying, okay? Orders the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organizes a coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune. Immune, immune, immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we'd like him to be. That is the majority's message today. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. That's what the media picked up on. That's the headline for CNN. He's a king above the law. That's why we named this episode after that. But that's a good point, right? If the majority really is saying that anything the president does is in his official duties and he can do whatever he wants without worrying about criminal prosecution, then really you're just trusting that the president's going to be a good guy. You're trusting that he's going to be, maybe not Thomas Jefferson, but I don't know, John Quincy Adams. Like, he's going to be a good guy. He's not going to abuse this power. You think one of the things Spencer brought up in his analysis was the drone strike Obama did on an American citizen, but it was in Yemen and he's a Muslim and it's the war on terror, and you know, okay, we're not going to make a big fuss about it, but we kind of have a gentleman's agreement that you're not going to do that on U.S. citizens in U.S., like people who are actually citizens, right? Right? We hope not. But if you did, could you be prosecuted for that? Let's say Obama had not made a drone strike in Yemen, but had made a drone strike in Chicago. Let's say he had targeted someone who was a white nationalist in Chicago. Drone strike. Killed the guy on site, just walking down Michigan Avenue. Gets out of office a couple of years later. Can he be prosecuted for murder? Extrajudicial killing on American soil, is that within his official acts of the presidency? It's a good question. I don't know. And that's what Sotomayor is pointing out. If Biden were to order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate Trump right now, would he be immune? Would that be within his powers, his official duties as president? I mean, if he deems, like Obama deemed that guy, Alawaki, if he had deemed him a threat, a terrorist, a threat to the existence of the United States of America, he has to be destroyed, no trial, can't bring him to America, can't even put him in Guantanamo, like, we just need to kill this guy. Well, what if Biden thought the same of Trump? We've got to take out Trump, or The minute he gets into office, he's going to install a white supremacist government. He's never going to leave. He's going to be dictator for life, just like Caesar. The republic is ended. We can't put this guy on trial. He's already skirted too many trials. He's got to go. He's a bloody terrorist, and I've got to kill him. He orders special forces to assassinate Trump. Is that within his official duties? Is he immune from criminal prosecution when he leaves office? That's a valid concern, I think, from Sotomayor. And that's why we're reading that dissenting opinion. Because if you're king, you're not getting prosecuted. The only remedy to a king acting in that manner is to take his head off and install a new king. That's all there is to it. That's how things used to be. Until we have this elective monarchy where you don't like what the president does, vote him out. But what if you don't? What if you just want to put him in jail? Like when Biden leaves office now, and it turns out that actually he was in communication with Fani Willis, and he was in communication with Alan Bragg and with Merrick Garland and Jack Smith, and he actually was involved in setting up Trump. Just like you can bet your bottom dollar Thomas Jefferson was involved in setting up Aaron Burr. Is Biden prosecutable? Or was all of this within his official duties as president? It's a good question. I don't pretend to know. I don't think anyone would pretend to know right now. Not even Sotomayor. But it is interesting. She's talking about personal financial gain and the president using his office, or the vice president using his office to do these things, which is exactly what the Republicans are accusing Biden of doing. So it's almost like Sotomayor is saying, look, if those things are true, Joe Biden, prosecute him. But I don't know. I don't know if they're official acts. So that's hers. Let's look for... I love this closing line, by the way, of Sotomayor. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. I mean, that's good. That is good. That's like, when you're in law school and you're reading historical cases like Marbury v. Madison and like all the real, like the meat of constitutional law, like that's the kind of thing you're looking for. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. That's a great line. I'm not saying that with irony. I really mean that. That was a good closing line. So now we've got Justice Jackson dissenting. Let me see if I can find this. Coming Kings. Is this the part right here? Nope. That's her closing paragraph. When you search for king, there's a lot of asking, making, decision-making, invoking. It's really frustrating. I can't do a whole word search on this thing. Here we go. All right. So this is how Jackson starts out. The dissenting opinion we read from Sotomayor is kind of like way down there. And Section 7. This is Section 1. She's right off the bat. You've just made Trump king. To fully appreciate the profound change the majority has wrought, one must first acknowledge what it means to have immunity from criminal prosecution. Put simply, immunity is exemption from the duties and liabilities imposed by a law. And then she quotes Black's Law Dictionary in a case, Hopkins v. Clemson, explaining that immunity is exemption from legal process. In its purest form, the concept of immunity boils down to a maxim: the king can do no wrong. A notion that was firmly rejected at the birth of our republic. Now, here's where it gets interesting. She quotes Clinton v. Jones for that one. It's a good start. As a liberal justice, I think that was a smart move. Because it was the Republicans who went after Clinton. And it was Clinton's defense that, no, I was president, you can't prosecute me. Right? And so it's good to get a case to support your opinion that's against the guy that people would say you'd support, right? But here's where it gets even more interesting. In that opinion, they're quoting Blackstone. So there are certain names in Anglo-American history that are just canon. Like they're holy writ, right? Blackstone and Koch are among those names. And these are the guys where they're like, look, this is what British law is. This is what law is. This is what we mean by law. This is what we mean by madness or by an insanity defense. This is what we mean by tort or by mens rea and actus rea. Like, these are the guys that everybody used to go to. I don't know about now. But to see a liberal justice now going back to Blackstone is really fascinating. I hope that she starts a trend with this. Is going back to all the source material in England. Although, it is worth pointing out, when America broke away from the English, we kept their system of law. However, I think she's right. Any maxim that the English had about divine right of kings or hereditary monarchy or the king can do no wrong, obviously we rejected all of that jurisprudence when we had our revolution and kicked the king out of here. So while we are still based on an Anglo-American structure, some things are just American now. So it's a good way to start off her opinion. To say that someone is immune from criminal prosecution is to say that, like a king, he is not under the coercive power of law, which will not suppose him capable of committing a folly, much less a crime. Thus, being immune is not like having a defense under the law. Rather, it means that the law does not apply to the immunized person in the first place. Conferring immunity, therefore, creates a privileged class free from liability for wrongs inflicted or injuries threatened. I could not agree more. And if you were applying this to prosecutors and cops, I'd be 100% on board. The problem is you're talking about the president. The president's a different animal. Just like the Congress is a different animal. You know, cops can't go around making laws. You can't prosecute, whether fortunately or unfortunately, a senator for introducing a bill that's batty. You can't look at a prosecutor and say, you just, passed a law or at least introduced a law saying it's illegal to say, I don't know, it's okay to be white. Right? Let's say a senator introduces a law saying it is now hate speech to say it's okay to be white and it's a misdemeanor punishable by whatever. Obviously, it's going to fail. It's not going to get passed just because it's just too in your face, unconstitutional. But that being said, you can't then prosecute the guy for treason because he's knowingly introducing laws that are unconstitutional. You can't do that. Whereas if a cop, went around arresting people saying, well, I'm the sheriff in town now and I'm telling you it's illegal to spit on the sidewalk, you're coming with me. You can't do that. Like that sheriff is not acting within his official duties. You probably could sue that guy. Right? So Congress is a different animal from the police, and so is the President of the United States. He has absolute immunity for a reason. His job is just too bloody important. His functions are too bloody important to allow 350 Americans to sue him every time they don't like something that he does. Thus, being immune is not... Okay, we already read that sentence, but that's the thing. She's talking about a protected class. Where is that? Conferring immunity, therefore, creates a privileged class free from liability for wrongs inflicted or injuries threatened. That is actually what has happened with cops and prosecutors and judges, but again, I get that. I'm not going to die on that hill, but cops and prosecutors, I will die on that hill. Absolute immunity for cops and prosecutors is freaking criminal. It's absolutely criminal. That's how we've expanded into this police state we're in now. This dystopian nightmare in which we live is because they have immunity from prosecution. They have immunity from lawsuits. It's madness. You know how hard it is to sue a cop when they knowingly arrest an innocent person and destroy their lives, destroy their families? Jackson should be upset about that. They should all be upset about that. Way more than what Trump has done or not done. Because they have created a privileged class free from liability for wrongs inflicted or injuries threatened. Her analysis is right. It's just she's barking up the wrong tree. It is indisputable that immunity from liability for wrongdoing is the exception rather than the rule in the American criminal justice system. That is entirely unsurprising, for the very idea of immunity stands in tension with foundational principles of our system of government. It is a core tenet of our democracy that the people are the sovereign and the rule of law is our first and final security. From their own experience and their deep reading in history, Oh, I love seeing liberals talk about a deep reading in history. From their own experience and their deep reading in history, the founders knew that law alone saves a society from being rent by internecine strife or ruled by mere brute power, however disguised. That's a quote of Frankfurter in a 1947 case. This paragraph is just something else, right? The very idea, I can hear Biden saying that from the debate, the idea that she would say that. The very idea of immunity stands in tension with foundational principles of our system of government. I think if the shoe were on the other foot, she would repeal that sentence right now. What if the Democrats got it in their mind to start going after... No, forget that. What if the Republicans right now, who history and the tide of politics and moral right and all this are on their side right now? Jesus is on their side right now, by all objective standards, right? These Republicans decide any Supreme Court justice from 1973 who still happens to be alive today, we're going to prosecute that son of a gun for Roe v. Wade, for the millions of children murdered because of these Supreme Court justices, these activists in robes who completely usurped the people's power to determine their own state health prerogatives. We're going to prosecute all of those justices criminally. I'll bet you Justice Jackson be singing a different tune. She said, we love absolute immunity. Judges, of course, judges are absolutely immune for prosecution. Or, taking a more modern example, what if the Democrats now are like, you know what? I don't like this opinion at all. I didn't like Dobbs. I like this one even less. Well, you know what? We're going to go after Alito. Definitely Thomas, before he gets out of control. Thomas is trying to outlaw sodomy, for goodness sake. We can't even have America without sodomy. We've got to prosecute these judges. I'll bet you Justice Jackson, even though they wouldn't be after her, they'd be after her colleagues, Justice Jackson would be singing a different tune. She'd be like, no, whoa. These are our official acts as Supreme Court justices. You can't prosecute us for this. Even though my colleagues are racist, lunatic right-wingers, you can't prosecute them. Because then what if we have a decision that we like and, the Republicans are going to come after me and say that I was criminally negligent or malicious in my rulings and I should be prosecuted? God forbid. So, yeah, Justice Jackson loves this whole, that's, the very idea of immunity is in tension with our foundations of government. No, it's not. No, it's not. And you want immunity. Trust me. A corollary to that principle sets the terms for this case. No man in this country is so high that he is above the law. No officer of the law may set that law at defiance with impunity. All the officers of the government, from the highest to the lowest, are creatures of the law and are bound to obey it. That's a quote of United States v. Lee, 1882 case. I should have looked that up. I don't know what that case is. But here's the thing. No man in this country is so high that he's above the law. I was actually in the district court in Washington, D.C. this week. And they had those, those giant cardboard signs that you'd see at a museum, right? And they have outlines of history. Well, there's a whole row of that leading up from security all the way to the elevators. This whole row of these cardboard posters telling you the history of what's gone on in this district court. Well, one of those is my boy, Richard Nixon. And the quote there, and bold as brass letters, is that quote: "No man is above the law." They're going after Trump hard, like they did Nixon. Nobody knows what happened to Nixon after he left office, but they didn't just stop with having him resign from office. They crushed Nixon into the ground. Now, they didn't prosecute him criminally. Well, at least he was, given a pardon. But I mean, they weren't trying to put him in prison. Is the point, right? Like these guys want Trump to die in prison for what he's done. They didn't just let it go for Nixon, which Trump really should have paid attention to. They had him disbarred from the Supreme Court. They ruined his bloody life. Like, they just drove him completely out of politics. You're never coming back. You couldn't even be mayor of whatever town from California he was from. Whitlow? Whittier. You can't even be mayor of Whittier, Richard. No man is above the law. And they're bringing that back now with Trump. No man is above the law. And this evil Republican majority on the Supreme Court has just said Trump is above the law. He's a greater president than Richard Nixon. He's essentially king now, thanks to the majority. We have long lived with the collective understanding that decency, security, and liberty alike demand that government officials shall be subjected to the same rules of conduct that are commands to the citizen. For in a government of laws, existence of the government will be imperiled if it fails to observe the law scrupulously. That's a good quote. I like that. And I agree. People in the government should observe the law scrupulously. I definitely agree with that. Problem is, again, you're barking up the wrong tree. You should be going after prosecutors and cops. You should be repealing qualified immunity for cops right now. You should be attacking absolute immunity for prosecutors when they are going after people for free speech. They're going after people for exercising their constitutional rights. They're going after people because they're just politically inconvenient for them, or because, prosecuting them will boost their political career. In fact, that reminds me, we have a video. Let's show you the next video. I love this one. You're going to love this one too. Check this out.
Here's the truth. Fighting to protect women's reproductive freedom, to keep our kids safe from gun violence, to stop extremists from destroying our way of life. We can't do that in Virginia without an attorney general with the spine. I'm Shannon Taylor, and if I've learned anything from 28 years of experience as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, it's that our fundamental freedoms live or die in the courtroom. That's why, as Henrico's Commonwealth's attorney, I led a movement immediately after the Dobbs decision of DAs across the country refusing to use our offices to enforce any law that goes after a woman for getting an abortion or a doctor for providing one. I've worked to get guns off our streets and keep our kids safe. And I put Virginia's KKK leader behind bars for his racial violence. I'm running for Attorney General because if our rights, our safety, and our freedoms aren't guaranteed in Virginia, then I want to be the one on the front lines defending them, and I've got the spine to do it.
So, anyway, that's a real woman right there, not a tranny. That, Shannon, what is her last name? It's like that scene in Troy, where it's like, that's why no one will ever remember your name. That's this woman. Shannon Taylor, thank you. Oh my goodness. I knew that. So Shannon Taylor, I don't know if you caught this. So there was a lot in that video. She's running for Attorney General, right? You're like the lawyer in your state, or in this case, the Commonwealth of Virginia. She's running for Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Virginia, top lawyer. She's being a Commonwealth's attorney, which means she's a prosecutor, right? You might have caught this in her video. She's saying right after the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, my office decided we're not going to prosecute anybody for abortions. We're not going to enforce the law. That was her decision. You might recall here in Florida, a prosecutor out in Tampa had that same exact position, and DeSantis removed him from office. And then this little person sued DeSantis saying that was illegal, and the Supreme Court said, no, that's definitely legal. You refuse to enforce the law, and Governor DeSantis has the right to do that. And then he did it here in Orlando. He did it to Monique Worrell. Not exactly for the same reason, but the point is you can't refuse to enforce the laws as a prosecutor. That's your entire job, is to enforce the laws that are passed by the Congress. And this woman is just outright saying, it's actually my political policy not to enforce the laws because I'm a raging liberal. And I don't care what the laws say. I'm not going to prosecute a woman for killing her child. Duh. What you might not have noticed is that in the very beginning of this video, there is a clip of the Torchlight Rally in Virginia the night before the Unite the Right, the Torchlight Rally of August 11th, 2017. You might not have caught that, but this is the woman who was the prosecutor on Jacob Dix's case. So let's watch that again. Now that you understand that this is the woman who just prosecuted the Dix case, and she used Dix's case as a springboard to run for Attorney General of Virginia. Now that you know that, let's watch this video again.
Here's the truth. Fighting to protect women's reproductive freedom, to keep our kids safe from gun violence, to stop extremists from destroying our way of life. We can't do that in Virginia without an Attorney General with the spine. I'm Shannon Taylor, and if I've learned anything from 28 years of experience as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, it's that our fundamental freedoms live or die in the courtroom. That's why, as Henrico's Commonwealth's attorney, I led a movement immediately after the Dobbs decision of DAs across the country refusing to use our offices to enforce any law that goes after a woman for getting an abortion or a doctor for providing one. I've worked to get guns off our streets and keep our kids safe. And I put Virginia's KKK leader behind bars for his racial violence. I'm running for Attorney General because if our rights, our safety, and our freedoms aren't guaranteed in Virginia, then I want to be the one on the front lines defending them, and I've got the spine to do it.
So, now that you know this is the woman prosecuting Jacob Dix, now how do you feel about that campaign commercial? It's a little more sinister, right? She launched this campaign off of that trial. She is overtly political. Doesn't even pretend that this is about the law. In fact, her own campaign ad says, we've made a policy not to enforce the laws. Any law I disagree with, I just don't enforce it because it's against my political ideology. Think about this. Tufts and Hensley were removed from prosecuting Dix's case. Not mine. That's a different... Just don't even get me started on that. They were removed from prosecuting Dix's case because, obviously, there are political partisans. Obviously, they're unfit to try the case. Again, same as my case, but we won't open that can of worms today. They were removed from the case for that reason. And so, who do they bring into the case? Is it like a neutral prosecutor with no political views who doesn't care one whit which way or the other who was right at Unite the Right 7 years ago? No. They bring in a notorious leftist from Henrico County who has refused to enforce the law that she disagrees with politically, who is now using the case as a springboard to run for one of the highest offices in Virginia. If I were Dix's lawyer, I'd be moving to recuse that woman forthwith. Now, they do have a hearing coming up next month. I think it's August 22nd on motions to dismiss, and then we're going to see whether they're bringing the charges back or what's going to happen. But in between them, man, if I were Dix's lawyer, I'd be removing that woman from the case immediately. She shouldn't be a prosecutor at all, let alone, in this case. You can say what you will about Tufts and Hensley being on the case, And, personally, I have a lot of thoughts on someone who jumps from the public defender's office to take over the prosecutor's office just so they can prosecute their political enemies. But, I've never heard them say we're going to refuse to enforce the law. They have a lot of liberal policies and, they might be called soft on crime, but, Hingley isn't using this case to run for governor. At least not yet. I mean, that I could be wrong. But this woman, if you thought Tufts and Hingley were out of control, this woman is 100 times worse. It's unbelievable. Like out of the frying pan and into the fire. Luckily, she's an idiot. So Dick's attorney got the luck of the dice on that one. At least the judge appointed a half-retarded prosecutor. Anyways, back to the chat here. So I posted that LinkedIn article. It's supposed to be a law review article, but no one will publish me in the legal profession. Imagine that. On the foundations of the authoritarian foundations of the presidential office. Florida Treasurer says, hello and happy 4th. Happy Independence Day, Florida Treasurer. And to all of you, happy Independence Day. Great day for fireworks and burgers. I don't know about freedom, but lots of fireworks out there. Hopefully you got your burgers. Let's see. Florida Treasurer says this ruling just reinforces the troublesome concept of qualified immunity as it relates to federal, state, local law enforcement officials. Yeah, exactly. All these Democrats are up in arms about, well, Trump has immunity. He's a king now. And how could you even believe in absolute immunity or any immunity at all? Because it's just un-American. It's like, you people think the same thing when it comes to feds and cops and you, Supreme Court justices, and the media, by the way, completely unaccountable. We can't sue the media, free speech. Nobody has a problem with those you can't sue me lawsuits, right? But this president guy that they don't like, and they want to weaken his power, and they want America to collapse, so yeah, you can't have immunity there. That's the one place you can't have immunity, right? Jacob says, as we've learned, even prosecutors benefit from immunity unless their powers were exercised maliciously or blatantly. Actually, Jacob, it's worse than that. Even if they were exercised maliciously or blatantly, you've got an uphill, you got an uphill battle on your hands. Because just like the Trump lawsuit, the question is, well, was it in their official duties, or was it not in their official duties to do this? So even if a prosecutor is acting malicious, now this is state by state, okay? This is just general commentary. I'm not giving anybody legal advice. That's my disclaimer. But let's say, just generally speaking, even if a prosecutor just hates you and, wants to prosecute you, is maliciously prosecuting you, like, you still can't sue him because he has absolute immunity, as long as it's within his official roles as a prosecutor. Now, if it's your neighbor and your neighbor happens to be the prosecutor and he brought the charges against you falsely, like, okay, that you could argue that that's not within his official duties and the whole thing was just rigged. But even if you can prove the prosecutor hated you, like in this case in Charlottesville, even if you could prove that Tufts and Hingley had a personal axe to grind, like, yes, you can have them disqualified from the case, but it's inconceivable that you could just sue them out of existence or criminally charge them. Well, that's the real question and issue here. Could you criminally charge Hingley and Tufts for bringing these false allegations against all of us? I don't think so. Maybe a better lawyer than me could find a way, but you can't criminally charge prosecutors for bringing charges against people. So it's worse than the way you've said it, Jacob. It's honestly worse than that. Brian says, good afternoon from the west, good afternoon from the east, buddy. Shovelhead, back at you. Happy Independence Day. Matt says, I don't celebrate the 4th anymore, but God bless you, Augustus. Well, yeah. Just, I voiced my whole thing about the 4th at the beginning of the program. I won't rehash that, but yeah, it's a complicated day today. Stormhunter says, fortunately, I've numbered my feathers for just such an occasion. So that's our episode for the day. We went an hour and 45 minutes. It's not like the courts are open. I do have a lot to do, though. So we'll call it a day. How about that? Good to know the audio is all working and the video's working. So next week we'll talk about some more stuff. I don't know. How about that? Till then, everybody, stay in school. Don't do drugs.
I'm here enjoying a nice day at the beach with my kids, and I turn around, I got these flags planted here on the beach by these MAGA fucks. Listen, this is all America. We know you didn't storm the beaches to stake out your territory on the beach. This isn't the fucking moon. I get it. This is America. But I'm sick of my flag being represented by white nationalist trash on a goddamn beach. Go fuck yourselves.